Welcome back. Last time we learned two words that were single letters attached to the beginnings of other words. In this lesson, we're going to explore three more letters that work the same way. Then, armed with that knowledge, we'll read the story of the first day of creation, Genesis 1 through 5, from beginning to end, a complete paragraph in Biblical Hebrew. First, a quick review of the particles we learned last time, the tiny words that aren't verbs, nouns, or adjectives that perform some function in the sentence. One of them was a separate word, et, that's used to mark the direct object of a verb when that direct object is something definite. The book, his book, Huckleberry Finn. And two of them were single letters that must be attached to the beginning of another word. One was the definite article the, which is indicated by hey with a patach and a dagesh in the next letter. Or if the next letter is a guttural or resh and can't take a dagesh, then you lengthen the vowel instead and use a long a kamatz instead of a patach. Look at hamelech, the king, but ha'ish, the man. And the other was the conjunction vav, usually and, but also or even but. It's v with a shva under most circumstances, but we also saw it as va in vayomer, and even as the vowel sound u. One important thing that distinguishes ha and v from et is a word. You can link it to another word with a makef, that's our Hebrew hyphen, but it's a word on its own. It's the fourth word in the Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. But ha and v cannot ever be separate words on their own. They're always and only found attached to the beginning of other words. If you want to entertain your friends at parties, you can call ha and v proclitic, always attached to the beginning of another word. Now we're going to learn three more particles that are proclitic. All three of them are single letters. All three of them have a shva underneath them when they're attached. And all three of them are prepositions, a word like in or by or for, that takes a noun or pronoun and relates it to something else that's going on in the sentence. The letters that are prepositions are bet, kaf, and lamed, be, k, and l. Be means in or at, k means like or as, and l means to or for. A word about prepositions is in order. In my experience, they're the slipperiest part of speech when you're moving from one language to another. I've given you a general sense of what these three prepositions mean, but when you're translating some particular example of one of these into English, you may find yourself using words other than the ones I just told you they meant, or no words at all. For example, in English, we choose a thing, direct object, but in Hebrew you choose bachar be something. Psalm 78:70, he chose David, vayivchar be David. So remember the common meanings for these three prepositions: be, in or at, k, like or as, l, to or for, but be prepared to be flexible. Always a good idea when you're learning a language. We've actually seen two of these prepositions already. If you think about in the beginning, bereshit, you'll realize that the bet that begins the Bible is actually our preposition be, in. And in verse 5, where God names the light and the darkness, we've seen le, because the Hebrew idiom for calling something by name is to call to it, kara le. So, God called the light day, vayikra Elohim laor yom, and the darkness he called night, ve'lachoshech kara laila. But notice, God is not naming light, he is naming the light and the darkness, or light, as in Yehi or, let there be light, versus ha or, the light. But where is ha when God calls to, that is, he names the light? Listen up, because this is going to happen a lot. You would think that to the light should be le ha or, but it isn't. What's wrong with le ha or? Because when you have a letter with a shva underneath it, followed by a hey with another vowel underneath it, the shva and the hey disappear. They're elided. Watch. Which leaves us, in this case, with la or, literally, to the light. We do this all the time in our own language without thinking about it. I didn't see it. What do you mean didn't? Where is the D of did and the O of not? They were elided. We say didn't. And that is what happens to a shva followed by a hey in Hebrew. So it's not le ha or, but la or. Not le ha choshech, but la choshech. And now you can see that bereshit is actually not in the beginning. That would be ba from be-ha, in the. So something more complicated is going on here. Jewish tradition asks why the Bible begins with bet, the second letter of the alphabet. Wouldn't you expect creation to begin with aleph, the first letter of the alphabet? But grammatically, the puzzler is why it begins with b, in, but not ba, in the. We're not going to solve that problem right now because we still have to take a look at our third proclitic preposition, k, like or as. We haven't seen it yet, but it comes just a little later in Genesis 1, in verse 26, when God decided, Vayomer Elohim, Na'aseh Adam, let us create a human. And how did he create it? In our image, B'Tsalmenu, according to our likeness, Ki Dmutenu. That's B, our image, K, our likeness. It's Ki Dmutenu because of the rule of Shva. We said last time, if you have two shvas in a row at the beginning of a word, the first shva changes to a chirek. So, and enu is the suffix that means ours. Malko, his king, Malkam, their king, Malki, my king, Malkenu, our king. This is a good reminder that the sounds of Hebrew words can change when you add things at the beginning or end of a word. B'Tsalmenu, but Ki Dmutenu, in our image, our tselem, according to our likeness, our dmut. When you put v in front of a letter with a shva, the vav changes to u. But b, ke, or le change to bi, ki, or li. A change because of the sound that doesn't change the meaning. And tselem changes to tsalmenu, just like melech changes to malkenu. We'll talk about why another time. One more thing about the rule of Shva, there's another letter besides vav, the u-o letter, that has a kind of vowelosity about it, and that's yud, the ea letter. When a word starts with yud and a Shva, and then you put a b, ke, or le in front of it, or a v, both shvas vanish. You don't pronounce the y, and you use a chirek, an e vowel. It's Yerushalayim, but Bi-Rushalayim in Jerusalem, Ki-Rushalayim, like Jerusalem, Li-Rushalayim, to Jerusalem, and even Vi-Rushalayim, and Jerusalem. Judah and Jerusalem, Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. And you can combine vav with one of the proclitic prepositions, Lihuda v'Lirushalayim, to Judah and Jerusalem. Of course, there are prepositions in biblical Hebrew that are separate words of their own. We've already seen el, another word for two, in the expression Vayomer Elohim el Moshe. God said to Moses. In verse 2 of Genesis, we'll see al, a word that means on or upon or over or above. El Al, the name of Israel's national airline, kind of sort of means to above. And we'll learn one more very important separate preposition in a minute. But many prepositions in the Bible are actually combinations of be, ke, or le with a noun. Here are two that are worth learning. Within or inside is literally betoch, in the middle of. You'll see an example in Genesis 1:6, the first verse of the second day of creation. This combination occurs more than 300 times in the Bible. And a really, really important one found more than 1,100 times in the Bible, lifnei, meaning before. Just as in English, lifnei can mean before in time or in space. Before the setting of the sun, lifnei vo hashemesh, he stood before the king, lifnei hamelech. That word, lifnei, is just our preposition le attached to penei, the face of something. To the face of is the biblical Hebrew idiom that means before. In Genesis 1:2, using al, we'll see the phrase above the face of the water, al penei hamayim, that is, over the surface of the water, using face as a metaphor for surface. But lifnei, 99% of the time really, just idiomatically means before. Forget about face. And notice, as soon as you put a vowel sound, even a tiny one like a shva before that pei, a beged kefet letter, the dagesh disappears, and the P sound turns into an F sound. Not lipnei, but lifnei. Doesn't change the meaning whatsoever. Now, the one very important preposition that's sometimes a separate word and sometimes proclitic. The reason this word can be proclitic is actually something that's going to turn out to be very, very important for our future Hebrew learning. It ends with a nun. It's the word min, from. Min haaretz, from the earth or from the land, depending on the context. It's a normal separate word. It's a preposition. It means from. But now about that nun. The N sound in any language loves to assimilate to other sounds. Depending on what your mouth is about to do, it can change or even seem to vanish. Let's look at some English examples using words that have the prefix in, meaning not. You can be effective or ineffective. You can be precise or imprecise. Because of the P sound that's about to happen, the N changes to an M. You can be legal or illegal. There aren't even two different sounds anymore, just an L sound. But because we're representing the N of in as well as the L of legal, we spell it and even pronounce it with a double L. We linger on that L longer than we would on a single L. And that is exactly what sometimes happens with the word min. Take the name Mitzrayim, Egypt. Now, min Mitzrayim, from Egypt. A phrase, this might surprise you, a phrase that only occurs a single time in the Bible, in Isaiah 20, verse 5. The other 90 or so times that the Bible says from Egypt, it's mi Mitzrayim, the mi of min, followed by a dagesh in the first mem of Mitzrayim. That's where the nun of min is hiding. That's what a dagesh does. It lengthens a consonant. We would say doubles the consonant. In this case, because the final nun of mem, the final nun of min, from, has assimilated to the mem. You don't have to learn any rules about when min is combined with the next word and when it's not combined. As far as I'm aware, there are no rules. Some words it happens all the time, like Egypt, Mitzrayim. With some words it happens some of the time. You just have to be able to recognize it. And how do you do that? You've got to look carefully. There's no I in team, but there are lots of Hebrew words that begin with mi. But is there a dagesh in the next letter? If there is, you're dealing with the preposition min, from, attached to the word as a proclitic. Now, you may be thinking, if you are, God bless you, you may be thinking, what if the word after min begins with a letter that you can't put a dagesh in? Let's look at the phrase, from the land of Egypt. Remember that land, in that sense, is Eretz, the same word as earth. So the land of Egypt is Eretz Mitzrayim. From the land of Egypt, like from Egypt, occurs about 90 times in the Bible, but only once is it min Eretz Mitzrayim in Jeremiah 44:28. All the other times, min is proclitic, but Eretz begins with an aleph, and you can't put a dagesh in an aleph. What do you do instead? You're going to be hearing me say this over and over again. When you need to lengthen a consonant and you can't, you try to compensate by lengthening the previous vowel instead. So the chirek lengthens to a tsere. It's mi Mitzrayim, but me Eretz Mitzrayim. Since the is ha, beginning with a hey, anytime they want to say from the anything, it will either be min as a separate word, or if the nun assimilates, it will be me, ha, whatever. From the earth or from the land, either min ha aretz, separate word, or me haaretz, proclitic. There are lots of other times in Hebrew when a nun assimilates to another consonant, but there's no other separate word that does what min does. Sometimes it gloms on to the next word, and sometimes it doesn't. Min is unique in that respect. But it's incredibly common, so do get familiar with it. And like be and le, it frequently combines with other prepositions. There are two occurrences of that right after our passage in Genesis 1:7. See if you can spot them. That's actually a good exercise to try, because we've only learned one of these prepositions. But attached min appears twice. If you can find both of them, you've learned what you need to know about min. Stop the lesson and take a moment to look for them. We're back, and here's where min appears. Mitachat and me'al. Al above, tachat below. And me'al and mitachat doesn't change that. Min added to other prepositions sometimes means from. Mostly it's just a quirk of the Hebrew language. And now let's consolidate what we've been doing since the beginning of the course and read the first paragraph of the Bible in Hebrew together. First, I'm going to read it to you straight through in Hebrew. Listen and see what you remember and how much you understand. If you want to pause and read the text in English first, by all means. Afterward, we'll work through it word by word and phrase by phrase. But first, not edited for beginners, the actual Bible in Hebrew. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. We haven't worked on verse 2 together, so just listen and see which particles and words you recognize. Ve'haaretz hayata tohu vavohu ve'choshech al pnei tehom ve'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. We learned verse 3. Vayomer Elohim yehi or. Vayehi or. Now verse 4, again with some words you should recognize. Vayar Elohim et haor kitov. Vayavdel Elohim ben haor uvein hachoshech. And we've talked about verse 5. Vayikra Elohim laor yom velachoshech kara laila. Vayhi erev, vayhi voker, yom echad. If you heard and saw anything but gibberish, that means you've really started to learn some serious Hebrew. Congratulations. Before we go on, this is a good place to pause and see at your own pace how much of the Hebrew you can, 1, read, and 2, understand. Then we'll work on it together again. All right, let's work through the text together slowly now. We'll put each phrase on the screen. I'll read it, and we'll talk our way through it. Here we go. Bereshit, we're going to translate the traditional way as in the beginning, even though, as you remember, it says be, in, not ba, in the, but Bereshit, in the beginning. Bara Elohim, God created. God is Elohim. As you remember, it's very common in biblical Hebrew for the verb, in this case, bara, to precede the subject. God created. And what did he create? Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the sky and the earth, both marked by et as definite, direct objects of the verb. Ve'haaretz, and the earth, haita, was, third feminine singular, tohu vavohu. Notice that the vowel under our conjunction v is a kamatz because the accent is on the very next syllable, and that bohu has no dagesh in the bet because this is a beged kefet letter with the vowel sound immediately before it. So instead of being pronounced as b, the bet is pronounced as v, tohu vavohu. And what is tohu vavohu in English? It's tohu bohu. Look it up if you don't believe me. Robert Browning even used it in a poem. Some Bible translations try to mimic the Hebrew sound play by using 2 words that begin with the same letter, like the Everett Fox translation, wild and waste. Since this is the teaching company, I can explain to you what it means. It's a state of perfect entropy, matter in the most undifferentiated condition it could possibly be in. And the story of creation is all about differentiating it. So the world was in a condition of extreme chaos, vechoshech al panei tehom, and darkness, choshech. English needs to add a form of the word to be here that Hebrew doesn't need. Darkness was over the face of al panei, deep. Deep with a capital D. Unlike most of the translations you have seen, perhaps, because it doesn't say ha tehom, it just says tehom. This word occurs 36 times in the Bible, and it's never ha tehom, the deep, because it's a proper noun. It's mythological. It's related to the name Tiamat, a character in the Babylonian creation epic called the Enuma Elish. Hidden under the surface of our biblical chapter is a polemic, an argument against the ancient Near Eastern idea that creation involved a battle of a land god against a sea god. This argument is not on the surface. You can read the story without knowing anything about it, but it's there for those who are in the know. And now you are in the know. There was darkness above this deep. Veruach Elohim. Ruach means wind or spirit. I'll let you decide whether you think this is a wind from God or the Spirit of God. The Hebrew could mean either, perhaps it means both. And this Ruach was merachefet, hovering, word that only occurs 2 other times in the Bible. It's a participle, by the way. Al pnei hamayim, above the water. Literally, on the face of the water, that is, over the surface of the water. Vayomer Elohim, and God said, Yehi or, let there be light. Vayehi or, and there was light, converted imperfect, so it's past tense. Vayar Elohim et haor, and God saw the light. Vayar means, and he saw. Ki tov, that it was good. Again, we have to use a form of to be here to make good English. Hebrew does not need it. If we were making a polished translation instead of just trying to understand the Hebrew, we would put this whole phrase into English syntax. God saw that the light was good. Hebrew says it in a non-English way, but a way that's quite natural for Hebrew. Like the verb coming before the subject, this is something that may take you a while to get used to. Vayavdel Elohim, and God separated, Bein haor uvein hachoshech, between the light and the darkness. Notice that Hebrew often repeats the preposition where English would not do that. Bein haor, between the light, uvein hachoshech, and between the darkness. Vein instead of vain, because vain instead of bain, because this second time there's a vowel before the bet. And why does v and become a vowel here? Because of the bump rule, remember? V before bet, mem, or pay turns into u. As with all of these rules, you don't have to remember to do it. You just have to recognize it. What next? Vayikra Elohim laor yom, God called the light day, velachoshech kara laila, and the darkness he called night. Vayikra first, because when he named light, that was the next thing he did. But the second time it's just kara, a perfect and not a converted imperfect, because that didn't happen next, it happened simultaneously. What did happen next? Vayhi erev, and there was evening. Remember that Hebrew doesn't have an indefinite article, no a or an, so this could be, and there was an evening. Vayhi voker, and there was a morning. Yom echad, one day, or a day. Stop and read the whole thing to yourself once more, and then I'll read it out loud to you again, straight through, all in Hebrew. Ready? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Ve'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu. Ve'choshech al pnei tehom. Ve'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. Vayomer Elohim yehi or. Vayehi or. Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. Vayavdel Elohim ben haor uven hachoshech. Vayikra Elohim laor yom, velachoshech kara laila. Vayhi erev, vayhi voker, yom echad. 3 hours of biblical Hebrew, and you can read the whole first paragraph of the Bible. I'm impressed. As you can see, by focusing on this one paragraph, you've already learned a lot of Hebrew that's really above your pay grade. So I'm going to offer you some extra challenges this time. First, our regular kind of challenge from Numbers 22. Find examples of each of the 4 prepositions we learned this time. Be, ke, le, and min. Min attached and unattached. Then, settle down and see what sense you can start making out of the story in Numbers 22. And this is something you can continue to do on your own all the way through the course. At the end of the course, we'll read Numbers 22 together, but there's no reason you can't get started right now. Read it in English first so that you'll recognize the names of people and places, and plenty of other things that you'll also recognize. Verse 2, Vayar Balak, Balak ben Zippor, son of Zippor, someone's name. So you should have no problem making the jump from Vayar Elohim, and God saw, to Vayar Balak, and Balak saw. And when he saw et something, that's got to be what? A definite direct object, the thing that he saw. And so forth. As much of that as you can do, I think you'll surprise yourself. And finally, one more challenge to get started on. Memorize the first paragraph of Genesis in Hebrew. Because the Hebrew that's in your head is the Hebrew you really, really know. All right, next time, adjectives. See you then.